I don't have anything funny to say about today's topic. We're going to talk about what it's like living with a partner who has some mental health problems today on the Manspace. Welcome to the Manspace podcast. We're your hosts, Doctors Matt Brown and Rob Porter, and clinical therapist Mike Porter. Welcome, Spacemen. Matt's original opening was better, but you'll just have to wonder what it was. It was good. It reminds me, I'm doing this band reunion in May. And what I've found is, my band, we're getting the band back together.
I don't remember you saying anything about that.
What, really? Oh, yeah. In May, we're going out to California. We have, I just had this brief moment of like, what if some people in the band listen to this podcast and didn't know and weren't invited?
Did you have people that you guys didn't invite?
Yeah.
Do you know that they listen to the show?
No, I don't know if they do. The only one I know for sure listens is the drummer. He listens religiously.
Are you going?
Ryan doesn't listen?
No, I think Ryan listens sometimes. He's probably like me. He's like, I don't listen to podcasts a bunch.
Yeah.
Are you going and playing a gig, or are you going and like hanging out, or going and jamming, or?
We're just going. I don't know. We haven't discussed it specifically. There is no gig, unless
that you know
the
of.
trumpet player and drummer set it up. But the plan, I think, is to just go and basically like, let's just play like our CD that we, like over and over. I don't know if it's over and over. Maybe they'll be like, let's write some new stuff. I'll be like, I'm up for a cover. But what I've found is it's not that my speed necessarily has gotten bad on guitar. It is exhausting. I didn't realize how fast I was playing. And it's the repetitive muting from your left hand when you're doing ska that's like kind of exhausting while you're doing this thing with the other hand. And because I guess my forearm muscle is just not there anymore. But it's actually the singing over those parts that like my timing gets all off. I'm like, geez, why is this so hard? But also I was going to say Matt's intro made me think, I can't really say it on here, but the original lyrics to Utah Girls, we changed it to the last line of the chorus was "That girl won't scratch my itch," but it used to say something different.
I remember it now.
Like, I'll sing the real ones this time. We were being clean and polite, as gentlemen should be, right? Anyway, you guys were already running out of time. And it's been so long since we've done this. I feel like, do I even know how to do this anymore? I mean, you guys did it last week, but spoiler alert, everyone, there was no podcast last week because these guys just chatted it up.
We recorded it, but
there's too much personal
in your defense, I was
too
in
personal.
Disneyland, so
my kids got shout outs in all the wrong ways.
Hey, it reminds me. I was going to shout out the guy who gave us one of the Spacemen gave us 3 shirts, a jacket. I found out what's in those little gifts. It's chocolate covered pretzels. And
nice.
Unfortunately, it'll be a long time
be
before I
cans
see you
of
guys
soda.
again. So those, no.
Won't
But
you see Matt
they
like
might get
in a
eaten
few
before I
weeks?
see you again. No, because it's my anniversary that day.
The 22nd is your anniversary?
Oh, are you coming up on the 22nd? Next week?
I thought you were coming here on the 22nd. Because I came up there last.
Maybe I'm going to work that out. Sorry, everybody, who I see on the 22nd.
Well,
now
I
it's a
thought
phone
that
call.
It was that, and then
No, that's a good idea.
February was going to be TAMFT or something, but
Maybe
we'll just
because
sit
I
and
can't
watch
come to
videos of CEs.
This is, it's funny as we keep talking like this. It's like, sit on the inside of a therapist's brain while we coordinate schedules. But
This is exciting stuff, Rob.
Oh, I got to tell you guys, I actually, for a half a second, I was going to really do this, where we've talked about going and getting our beards trimmed at a barber shop together.
Mm-hmm.
My two boys, Spencer cut his hair and like normal sized length.
Normal
And,
size haircut.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, I started to focus, Rob. Anyway, he had it cut. Stuart had his cut from a guy who drives around in a Mercedes van, and you step inside his van. His air conditioned TV. He's unfortunately.
Wait, that's where he does it.
Great job. Yeah, he's got like 6 trucks or something, and
Nice.
I think he said that UT hires him to go once a month, and they pay him some amount, a large amount of money to go once a month and just park outside one of the dorms. And then the students can just come get haircuts for free from him all day.
Wow.
But we're not going to do it because I told him, we were talking about beards, and I said, hey man, you do a good job on my kid's hair. I'll come back and you can trim my beard. But then my son came back in and it was horribly lopsided. I was like, he will not be getting to trim my beard.
Dude, that's why I've had a couple opportunities to go and do the beard thing, but I'm like, I don't trust you people. Like, since I've been cutting my hair since I was like 14, and so
yeah,
you cut your own hair.
Yeah, a few times in that span, I got haircuts, and I was like, you people suck. Like, I can do better when I'm looking backwards in the like.
Yeah. It's surprising how many people are just like, oh, you're not great at this.
Yeah.
Also, this isn't relevant to you guys, but I'll tell everybody. Do you guys know what Substack is?
Sounds familiar, but I don't.
It's like a social media platform for people who want to like write and things like that. I started a Substack and I posted a stack. I don't know what you call them, a blog.
Nice.
It was about precision of language. You're welcome.
Did you get any good feedback?
Go look it up. Well, it's hard to say. The people who've read it so far, people know me. So it's like, this is great.
Wait, we can look it up?
Yeah. It's on Substack.
Substack.
I don't know how you look it up.
Precision of language.
I guess you'd search Rob Porter, PhD, or short, precise language.
Oh,
I don't know.
Let's see.
How do I change the name of that? It doesn't matter.
If you're listening and driving, don't look.
Who subscribes already?
People I know. That's it.
You'll have to send it to us, man. I
posted last night. Get off.
Apparently, only one person has read.
How did you find it?
Nuh-uh.
Oh no, that's your.
It told me something like.
Are you asking how I found it?
Yeah.
I just Googled Rob Porter, or not Google. I just in the search engine. I just searched. Once I was on Substack, I searched Rob Porter.
Oh, okay. That's what I need to do.
Oh.
Just Google searching.
What was the picture, Mike?
It's like the picture from your website.
Oh. Yeah, the blog is a picture of Tobias when he's all blue, and it says, "I'm afraid I just blew myself."
Yeah.
That show's so funny. Okay. Look at me shamelessly promoting myself. It's fun to write. Anyway. Hey, focus up. I can see, Mike, you're reading. You both are reading. Stop it. Because now we're moving on to our topic because it's already 2:15.
I can't find it. Anyway.
Now, here's the thing, Spacemen. Today is the next maybe 2. Hey, by the way, have you guys read the book yet? Have you finished it?
I had read it before.
I'm about halfway through.
Read it again.
All right. Finish it up, Mike, because we got to pick a date for it.
Next week, right?
It's a little infuriating. Is it next week? Sure. Next week.
The book is infuriating?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's a good book.
Do they not?
It's say the name again for people who...
about. The coddling of the American mind. So that anybody who hasn't listened, get on board. You got a week.
Yeah, it's
easy.
I'm like super fascinated by it. It's only a couple.
I'll tell you,
hundred pages.
We'll get into it when we next time. But it's frustrating to hear his stories, a lot of it's focused on universities, and to hear his stories from the perspective of being a grad student and having experienced some of that, and then being a professor right in the time of that he was talking about, and feeling like, oh yeah, I felt that a ton. Mm-hmm. And I could give specific stories when the university was clearly catering to the student, and it was infuriating.
Yeah.
But that's for next time. Today, and in a future time, 2 sessions from now, 2 weeks from now, we'll be talking about another listener request. This one's a listener request that, in short, what? I guess I'll summarize it. Is I lost it. Now it'll take way too long to find again. Essentially, what I said at the beginning of this. What do you do if you are married to or in a relationship with somebody who has, we'll say, strong mental health, quote unquote, mental health problems? The question was not specific to a specific thing. Like, it didn't say someone who's dealing with bipolar or ADHD. It just said nothing that would get them institutionalized. Severe. Yeah.
Right.
But it's like, you could say severe anxiety, because that's a factor. I talked with people recently where it's like someone's going through for some trauma and it really affects the relationship. They're going to therapy for trauma, and it's really affecting the dynamics. So it's kind of funny. This is something we've covered before. I feel like maybe not, but this idea of, and I always feel like my answers to this are never super satisfying. I think people want something different. Like, you do this and it's no problem at all. But I feel like it's going to be rough. So first, well, let me say this first. I don't know if this is fair to say. I think I've noticed that lately, and I think I've said this on a previous episode, so this is no like come to Jesus moment, but I think I've lately have started to feel like I do believe in circular causality, the idea of feedback loops, and that it's not one person is to blame for something. But I feel sometimes more and more lately like you guys are both doing things that play into this dynamic, but you, sir or ma'am, keep doing this crap. And until you stop doing that, this is never going to improve. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it is like, hey, you need to go address how much anxiety you have. Or I've worked with people before where it's like, hey, I'm pretty sure your partner or your spouse, I'll say this with them there, have like you show these symptoms that are very similar to bipolar or very similar to this, to borderline or whatever. So I guess my first question when I read this was, it's kind of interesting because I don't know, maybe this wasn't specified in the request. Was, has your spouse actually been diagnosed with something, or you just think they have something? Mm-hmm. Like, I wonder how often that happens, that it's like they don't have a ton of anxiety, but you are really sensitive to when they get upset. And so you think they're always in a bad mood. And you attribute men will often diagnose their wives as bipolar because it's like, dude, she's super moody. It's like, that's not the same thing as bipolar. So
no, but they think it is.
Like, I guess in some ways, like I could say my first response to that is unsatisfying. And then I'll go into however, but my first response is like, hey, consider the possibility that they don't have a mental illness as severe as you think it is. Or that you're doing something in the circular causality loop that is actually perpetuating the thing you don't want. That's my first answer, because that's the only thing I can think, well, that's in your control. And it's possible that you've overblown this a little bit. But what would you say, like, where would you go first if someone said, what do you do if your wife has a pretty bad mental illness?
I would probably go, I guess, depending on the diagnosis, maybe the opposite direction. Like if mm-hmm. if you're talking like anxiety, depression, bipolar, like those seem to be less pointed to as as compared to like narcissism and some of these other diagnoses where people are like, diagnosing their partner. Maybe the partner has said,
TikTok,
I have anxiety, I have depression, and that's become kind of like the explanation for some things in their dynamic. And maybe, I guess I would approach this question like, let's just assume the person is dealing with diagnosable and perhaps is on medication for anxiety and depression or bipolar. What's my first step as a husband? So I think I would approach it that way first. And I think one of the, at least as I've helped men in this situation, I think the first step is like really, really educate yourself about what that is, because it's so hard to kind of get out of, like you said, those first reactionary stages of trying to make somebody feel better, trying to prevent something, trying to fix something, or being like taking it personally and not being able to put the mental illness in its place and like see your wife. Then I think educating yourself about it from good sources, not social media, right? Like helpguide.org is a really good starting place for anything mental health. They've got tons of good information on there. It's a good place just to get like an overview of something. And because I think you have to really start to like depersonalize yourself from it and understand behaviors a little bit differently. And that would play into what you're saying. Like if I'm not understanding things correctly, I'm probably feeding into some sort of loop where I'm increasing the symptoms of the mental illness.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's interesting because that's the reason I say what I said first is because I think I've heard so many times, so many people diagnosing their spouse. That's like, stop, you're probably not right. But in that context, I think what's interesting is the person who requested this said, like, I've tried Googling some stuff, but there's not a lot there.
Yeah.
And I thought it said not a lot there for men. And I thought, oh yeah, but there is a lot there on what that diagnosis is. And so if there is a diagnosis, it's like, okay, well, yeah, if you understand that, just to grossly oversimplify that, like with bipolar, you're going to have these highs and you're going to have these lows. And the highs may look like this, this, and this. And the lows may look like this, this, and this. They may last this length of time. They may do this. Or with borderline personality, you might have somebody who responds in this way, and this way. There are often tips, whether it's for men or for women, just saying, if in these kinds of relationships, here's some things that you can do yourself. And one of the things I talk about with people is you have to be consistent. Like what you're talking about, Matt, you got to depersonalize this. And sometimes I do that as an exercise with people. Like if I've never met their spouse, I'll say, let's just pretend. And I will emphasize, I'm only saying this for the sake of argument. Like pretend they have this diagnosis. How would you respond differently then? Because now it's no longer like they hate you. It's like, oh, wait a second. They might be in the middle of this space or this space. And when they're in that space, this is what I do. So if they're in a space where I know they're manic, and if we just borrow the over-exaggerated stereotype that they're not going to be sleeping for the next 4 days, it's like, okay, then I need to make sure that I'm consistent in this way, and I'm not going to engage in this and do this. So I have clear boundaries. But that comes because you understand that diagnosis specifically, or that disorder specifically, because without that, it's kind of like, if you don't know what panic attacks look like and your spouse starts having one, you're going to think, oh my gosh, they might die. Once you know what panic attacks are and even like the way that you can manage them, and it's like, oh, okay, I won't get panicked then because I know what this is. It also, I think, helps it so that you don't do the other mistake, which you just blame everything. You can end up dismissing their experience by saying you're just having a whatever break, a bipolar break or whatever, just like men do to women. It's like, you're just on your period. It's like, sure, they may be on their period, but they are still feeling this thing. You can't just dismiss the whole thing like this, like it's still a valid concern at some level. But But I think that comes because you know how to differentiate, like, is this because you hate me or is this because you're going through this dynamic?
Mm-hmm.
Scene.
Mike.
For me, like my initial reaction was, the same as Matt's, like, look, educate yourself on what you're dealing with. But the more I thought about it, I realized like one of the first things that I ask my clients is, how openly do you guys talk about this stuff? Because I find it's helpful. Like, again, am I dealing with the guy's perception of things, or am I dealing with conversations that they openly have about struggles that, the spouse has? Because if it's all his perception, then I'm going to put a little more focus on, all right, well, let's look at, on reframing some of the things. Let's look at why you might be feeling this from her, as opposed to accepting it as just the absolute fact that that's what's happening. When it's conversations they're having, and it's, like, yeah, no, we talk about, like, she knows she does this. She knows that this is the thing she struggles with. Like, then I'll still, like, it's always, I'm going to encourage them to learn as much as they can about it. And then particularly, I think with anxiety and depression, when I've worked with individuals or couples, where one of them struggles with like severe anxiety, I will spend a lot of time kind of educating the spouse on, hey, this is probably what your wife is dealing with. Like, this is like, you're saying that statement, here's how she's hearing it. And if it's a couple, the wife is over there being like, and the husband it's completely new to him. Like, he had like, what do you mean she's hearing it like that? And I'm like, that's what anxiety does. It's going to twist it. Like, it's not your fault. It's just what's going to happen. But the more that you can understand that, right? Like, then if he sees his wife react, it shifts from, oh, great, what did I do? To, oh, I think you might have misunderstood what I was meaning there, right? Like, it shifts the dynamic of the conversation a little bit, and can sometimes keep it in a more productive space. Are you laughing because I said sometimes?
Yeah, with like a half eye roll.
Well, it's like, because it's because I think, no, there are lots of, like, I also know lots of couples where, yeah, they talk about it, but when the spouse is in the middle of, like, I remember I was teaching, it was one of my last year's teaching, and the lady next door to me, the teacher next door to me, I was out in the portables. The teacher next door to me started having a panic attack, like in the middle of class. And luckily we had some aides in the room. And so I went and stepped outside and was trying to, like, hey, I need you to do these things for me. And she refused. Like, just flat out, like, no, I'm not doing that. And I'd been doing therapy enough that I knew that I could, and I knew her well enough that I knew I could kind of push back on her and not, like, cave to her, right? But I think, no, there are times where when their emotions are really heightened, it doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to have a productive conversation until they get to a different place. And so sometimes you just have to kind of ride it out. And it sucks. Like, I hate telling a dude that, like, or a woman, if it's her husband, like, I hate telling someone, like, yeah, sorry, you're just going to have to kind of let it run its course for a little bit until they get to a different space. If they're not going to let you do something, then you kind of have to just let it run its course.
Well, and I think that's what's interesting about, maybe it's downfall of this someone texting us a topic thing is that we don't have all the information. Like, because it's one thing if you're saying, I think they may have this problem,
Mm-hmm.
versus they have been diagnosed with this. Like, I've known some couples where one has been diagnosed bipolar, and they know this is how we manage it. They don't want to use meds, and so this is what they do. They have kind of various resources in place and things, but they're on the same page about it. They've talked about what this will look like for them. I think because I'm going, Mike, you're getting at this idea actually that's kind of interesting. Is you don't. There are things you just have to write out sometimes. Like, and this, it's fine. Like, that's easy to say, but like if someone's having a panic attack, it's like, it's all right. This will end. Like, so worst case scenario, we do nothing and you freak out for 20 minutes, if that. And then you'll come back down and then we can talk and say, okay, let's talk about what this looks like in the future. And let's develop a plan for this going forward. So sometimes, especially if it's there, they'll be able to have, it's Mike's infinite wisdom of having a conversation. Curse you, Mike. Of a conversation of like, hey, what is our game plan when someone's not in a quote unquote, we'll say episode, right? Or not at that peak heightened thing of something. That to be able to say, I want you to know, like, I want to educate myself on this because I want to be helpful to you. I also want to be able to tell you when we're not in those moments of why sometimes this is hard for me and how we can talk about that for us together. Like, that when you're in that space, and when we're done and we could say, hey, that was really hard. Can we talk about how that one went? And maybe we need to change your therapist or your meds or your exercise or whatever the thing is together. But if you feel like you're on that same page, then it can be a very different conversation. My suspicion with this text we got is that that person just might think that person has that problem. Or it's even possible that they do have that problem, that, meaning diagnosed problem, but that there hasn't been maybe a mutual, like, okay, how do we deal with this together? It's like, okay, well, go figure that out. And the person maybe feels defensive about it or closed off about it, guarded about it, like, and don't blame me for this stuff, and saying, well, I don't want to do that, but I do want to get on the same page with you. I think a lot of what I see is like, I've worked with people before where I have told a spouse, like, hey, look, I'm not big on diagnosis, but you clearly have a lot of anxieties, right? Without saying you have anxiety. And it really impacts when you get freaked out like this. This is what happens over here. And I've told him, you're doing these things. It's escalating those anxieties for this person. So here's what you need to know about that. And that's another helpful part of that conversation is to say, are there things that I do that feed into these things that go on for you? Because sometimes that can be happening that you don't know you're doing. It's not like you're doing something wrong. You're just doing something you didn't know fed into that. And I think that's a helpful conversation. But I think that it's two different types of answers to me. If both people know this is the diagnosis that we're dealing with versus I suspect they may have this thanks to TikTok.
Well, and I think even if there's not, because like thinking about it, like, the three of us tend to avoid giving diagnoses. Not like we can't just pull the book and look it up, but, and I think, I think a lot of people are probably dealing with undiagnosed stuff. I mean, even, the diagnosis from the depression meds I was on for a year and change was anxiety. And I was like, that's funny. That's not, but I already had that diagnosis on file for when I'd been in before. So the doctor's like, why am I going to change it? They're still going to pay it. But I think, like, again, there's something to be said for what kind of conversations are you having? Because even if you don't know what the diagnosis is, you're going to recognize those moments where things get tense. And being able to go to your spouse and say, hey, what's helpful for you in that moment? And what's not helpful for you in that moment? Like you can still have those conversations regardless of diagnosis, as long as you're having conversations about, here are these dynamics that are existing between us that if we're not talking about, it's going to get problematic in a hurry. But if we're talking about, we've got options of how we can approach it and things that we can do, like often, and then I'm curious about something, but often I'll encourage them, like, ask them how they receive what you're doing. You're doing this thing that you think is helpful. And, if I'm with a couple, I can be like, I can tell you right now, she doesn't think it's helpful. But if I'm just working with an individual, I'm like, go ask them if they think it's helpful. And most of the time they're like, yeah, they didn't think it was. And I was like, yeah, I'm not surprised. So ask them what would be, right? So that you're not wasting your efforts and energies and just making it worse because you're doing something that's frustrating as opposed to alleviating any stress. But again, it's having those conversations. The thing I'm curious about, what do you guys do when you're working with someone and you encourage them to have these kinds of conversations, and what they come back and tell you is, oh, that didn't go well. And it never goes well. Like every time you encourage them to be like, try this approach or try that. And they come back and like, it didn't go well.
No, I think that's probably more common than not because one, you're not like facilitating a conversation with the people in the room. So a lot of stuff gets lost in translation, but I guess when I think about educating, there's just the information about a diagnosis, but then also like going a step further, I really find a lot of value in giving like personhood to depression or anxiety or, anything, where if you just imagine your partner as themselves entangled in a relationship with their depression, right? Who's like a living, breathing person, or their anxiety. And so the degree to which they're entangled with it is going to reflect in those conversations. So it's like in that moment, who are you talking to, right? Is it like you're talking to her depression and she's like trapped behind it? Or do you feel like you got her and you two were talking about her depression? And I think there's a spectrum that really is a lot like the stages of change where, if you're talking to somebody who's maybe clearly dealing with something like depression or anxiety, but they don't see it as a problem, right? They don't see it affecting them. That's somebody who's like just really entangled with and blended with that, issue. And so it's hard to have a conversation with them about it, right? Whereas somebody who's further along, like at the action stage of the stages of change, they've clearly differentiated themselves from it, right? And sometimes that's where a diagnosis is helpful, is they can say, oh, okay, now this thing that I couldn't label, I can peel it off of me and it's this separate thing, right? And that helps me feel, educated and empowered to make change. Other times it's, it can be kind of an enabling thing where it's like, well, I'm stuck with this thing that, I can't get out of a relationship with, so deal with it, right? So that's, I think, where we maybe are careful with diagnosing, because we want it to be the former of those two situations. That's the only helpful situation. But yeah, at any given time, just being able to ask yourself as a husband, like right now, who am I interacting with? Her anxiety or her as a person, right? And even sometimes just using that language where it's like in a calm moment, right? Where I don't think you like to be enmeshed with and entangled with your anxiety. Like, how does it feel? It's like a panic attack, or it's, my mind's racing and I'm telling myself all sorts of things that just key me up and keep me up. And so getting into a conversation where you can kind of ask that person what their relationship with it is like and how they feel in that relationship. And you represent somebody who can connect with them as a person and work together to kind of put that issue in its place and change your relationship with it. Like the imagery works really well for me because I can see somebody and say, I'm not talking to you right now. Right. So in that situation, that's a much different set of strategies and coping that you would employ as a husband, right? Versus, okay, I have you right now. Now let's have this kind of conversation, right? If it's your anxiety, right? I can lend calm. I can lend like groundedness. I can lend all sorts of things that show you just outside of your entanglement with that issue is a person that's waiting for you and can support you, right? But I can't get into the fight. Like I can't fight with your anxiety. I will lose every time, right? I can't fight with your depression. I'll lose every time, right? And that's not me abandoning you. That's me trying to like ground myself in a place that we can connect and strengthen ourselves to combat this. But if it's like if the person is talking like, oh, my anxiety is like kicking my butt today. Okay, cool. That's you, right? Like if they're talking about it as a separate part of them versus like from a really blended place of speaking, there's in internal family systems, they use the language like with parts, right? Like, are you speaking from a part of you or for, right? And I think when someone's speaking for, that's different, right? Where it's like, my anxiety is saying this, right? Versus speaking from it, and it's all the anxious thoughts. And, just kind of focusing on, I really want to talk to and connect with you. Can you step back from the anxiety, from the depression, right? So I think it depends on where the person's at, I think, in terms of how you would engage and what you would do.
I think, oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to say to Matt, like, I think that idea of being able to separate the two, right? Like Michael White calls it externalizing the problem. But that idea of because so often people that deal with depression and anxiety, they struggle with that. And I suspect with, just about any mental disorder, they struggle with feeling like it's them, right? This is me and I'm broken. And this is me. And it's like, no, it's not you. You're still in there. You just have this thing that is at times crushing and for sure overpowering and weighty, on its best day kind of thing. That kind of separation, I think, is extremely beneficial. And the way you talked about it, Matt, I thought was, for me, like, that's a very visual approach. I like it a lot. You were saying, Rob, sorry.
I think that question you had was actually something, it's the other thing that I tell people to work on in these situations, which is kind of my other, based on time, I'll probably say take homes. But one thing was like, cause I agree that externalization, that is this the you I'm talking to you? Is this the anxious coming out, or the anxiety? And it's kind of a caution. I think you have to do that very carefully. And as Matt, you were pointing out this idea, it's like, you do have to kind of build that together. Like, hey, you and I talk about this external thing, because too many people will run the risk of dismissing because, oh, this is just the anxious you, so I don't need to listen to this. And it's not to say you don't need to listen in those times. It's saying you take it in with a different frame of reference. There still may be valuable information in that. If nothing else, there's valuable information in the fact that they are freaking out, or they are upset, or whatever it is. It may not be that you're cheating on them, like they're saying, but so that's where it's like, I think this is the anxiety. But don't just dismiss out of hand, like your whole experience right now is invalid. That becomes problematic. The thing that I think is the other key to this, and I think it's part of the key to having, if they say the conversation didn't go well, I'll say, well, I didn't tell you to do it for that reason. And it's also the key to, like, if you're going to have a good conversation with somebody, this is going to be necessary. If the whole nature of this question, without having said it directly, is almost like, I don't know how to be happy if she's going to be like this. Mm-hmm. And there is a degree that's like, if you're committed to this relationship, it's saying, okay, how do I keep developing myself even if this is going on? And sometimes we get so focused on, I can't be the person I want to be, or I can't be happy because my wife or my husband has this, or this going on. Nobody says it quite so directly, but often that's the answer. It's like, we can't make any progress because she's got this. And so sometimes I want to say, stop looking so much at that other person and start looking to say, okay, look, if this is where you are and what you are dealing with and what you didn't know you signed up for, but you signed up for, how do you keep developing yourself so that you become maybe at times a little more patient, or a little more forgiving, or a little more communicative or direct or whatever, so that you're becoming the person you want to be. And you can put your spouse in context and say, yeah, I still love her. She gets, sometimes this thing knocks her over, but that requires a lot of confidence in self to say, even if she's upset, it doesn't mean I'm a horrible husband, which too many husbands already think. If she's mad, I've done something wrong. Well, sometimes no, she's mad because she's got a whole bunch of other stuff going on. But you have to be building yourself in that process and focusing on, how do I be the best version of myself, or the best husband that I believe I can be, while also taking input from her, right? If I think the best version of husband for me is that I come home every day and I slap my wife on the butt and she's like, I don't like that, then it's like, okay, maybe the best version is actually that I show you affection, not that I slap you on the butt. And so I want to keep building that part. And so the feedback is there, but I think it matters to be able to look at ourselves and say, okay, well, I can't base me being in a good spot or happy in my marriage on what your mood is. Because if it's unregulated, undiagnosed, unmedicated, mood swinging, then it's like, well, then good luck. You're going to have a bad day because she's having one. How do you still have a good one anyway? And I think that makes you more confident to enter into a conversation with your wife or your husband to say, can we talk about this thing? Because this is getting hard. When it's not like what you're pointing out, Mike, don't do it like in the middle of a panic attack. I've been meaning to talk to you about this. You do this a lot. It's like, yeah, that's not going to work. So I think building that sense of self, I think, is another key factor in my mind. That's why when people say it didn't work, I think, no, I wanted you to have the conversation because I want you to change the dynamic between the two of you. That if there's something off, I want you to be able to go and talk with her. Now we can talk about why it didn't work. And Matt, as you point out, I wasn't there to craft the relation or the conversation with you. If you were in my office, I would have crafted it. I would have interrupted and said, you're trying to tell her that you feel this, but actually what you're telling her is you act crazy. And so, yeah, it didn't go well, guy, well, so anyway, I don't know do you guys have any other take home messages since we're running out of time?
I'd just say, like, yeah, progress into a place where, like when you have something like anxiety or depression going on in your relationship, it's attempting to control the person who has it, and then it's siphoning off energy from you and oftentimes causing you to feel guilty for things that aren't wrong, like taking care of yourself, having good boundaries around like how much you engage, because oftentimes it can convert into conversations like you're not there for me, or you're not, and it's tough because it really can feel like, well, crap, I'm not, you have to obviously be sensitive and available, but you have to also recognize that if I'm not taking care of myself, right? I mean, this goes for like any sort of situation where you're helping somebody with something, whether it be like chronic illness or mental illness or things like that. Like, you have to remember that you taking care of you, as much as you can possibly do that, right? Like that, anything you do in that direction will always be a good thing. And everything around you will probably cause you to doubt that. So just remembering that that's not true. Taking care of yourself is not a bad thing.
Agreed.
Which I think ties into the, like, I guess my take home is, and it's one of the things, and I always feel a little bit bad saying it to clients. But to me, it's a really important thing for them to understand is you can't manage their stuff for them. Like if you're looking for some secret combination of behaviors and words and whatever that are going to keep your spouse from having this issue, you're never going to find it because it's not there. You can't manage it for them. They're going to have those things. And like in some instances of people I know, like, yeah, the spouse is aware of it, but she won't go see a therapist. And I think, sorry, man, you can't make her go see a therapist. Like, you can know all day long it would be better, but you can't do it. And so it's starting to recognize, like, you identify what are the things that you can control, which comes back to, I think, the things that both of you were saying of that focus on how do I improve myself in this situation, and how do I make sure I'm taking care of myself in this situation, because those are things you actually can control. Whether your spouse has a panic attack or not, lots of times that's going to be outside your control. It's not caused by anything you're doing. Now, that's not always true, but oftentimes it will be, right? It's not caused by something you're doing, so there's not a lot you can do to, try to keep it from happening. Or your wife's going to feel depressed, and again, there's not a lot you can do about that. So it's learning how to support and recognizing I can't take it away for them. I can just learn how to support through it, and recognizing what you can control.
I do think too, it's interesting in this. It's sometimes when we have these conversations of telling somebody like, hey, look, there's some things you can't change, but here's what you can do. I think it's a little bit of trying to move men out of the idea of that no one wants to admit that they're in, but out of the idea of victim mentality. I'm a victim of my circumstance or whatever it is. And into, hey, there's things you can control and there's still things you can change. And I think that's incredibly valuable to teaching the next generation of men. Hey, look, it's okay. You can go through this hard stuff and still have the things that you want. Like, you can adapt and change. And let me show you how to do that. So I think not only is it taking care of yourself, but it's modeling for your kids in many ways. This is how you can adapt and still be the person you want to be and still love somebody through something really difficult. So good job, Spacemen, and good question, Spaceman. Anonymous Spaceman.
You know who you are.
You know who. Actually, I could imagine that there's like a bunch of people who's like, I don't remember writing in. Did I write something in? So keep writing us your questions because I like answering them. And then come back next time. I'm at 59%, guys. We'll find out if I ever upload.
Wow.
And join us on the Manspace. Is nice bed, plenty space you can look at.
You can look at.